So welcome to another happiness class. This is a weekly show. Normally it's in the world famous Speaker's Corner in Hyde Park, London, but I'm here on holiday in a country called Jordan in the Middle East. You might see the bling behind me, kind of representative of it. You might hear all sorts of weird background sounds. So today is people are celebrating for exam results, which means you might hear fireworks. You might hear gunfire because that's the traditional way of shooting. I know it's illegal now, but they still do that. I'm in a village, so they kind of get away with more rules, get away from more things. But all sorts of other sounds. You might hear tractors and whatever. But let's get beyond that. What else is there? There's three things I want to tell you before we can get on with the show, so everybody knows what's happening. First of all, what is this show about? It's about personal to global issues. It's, I think, a pretty comprehensive happiness course. Today we'll be talking about the main topic will be mistakes, but there will also be other contemporary questions. The three questions that we will discuss are: is regret healthy? Why is history censored? Is there an energy crisis? If you want to find out more, do go to the description. There's a link to the website where all the shows are at bigquestionsanswer.com. Please do get involved. It's all about involvement, especially when we're in Hyde Park Speaker's Corner. We get loads of involvement, but online, please get involved in the comments. I, possibly Dust, whoever wants to, will respond, but I always respond to comments. And if you really like what's this show about, and I do this show because I think there's nothing else like it. Quite a broad, big claim. I wouldn't talk about stuff if it was already being talked about. So if you like what is being said, do promote the show through the algorithm by pressing the like and subscribing. Let's do a quick intro to, there's Dust here, big time speaker at Speaker's Corner. Thank you for joining us. Waheed, my oldest friend, one of my old friends, let's say. You have to get pretty far down to be my oldest friend, but anyway, Waheed, just say hello so we can see your face, because I think the screen changes immediately when you talk.
Hello.
Yes, it's working. Yeah. Yay. So that's Waheed. Lots of positive energy there. Let's get going. First question is regret healthy? Short, so I always come from, I'm coming from an Islamic point of view. We've got different perspectives. We've got Dust from an agnostic point of view, Waheed from a Muslim but free form point of view as well. Kind of that's not his pigeonhole, I don't think. Anyway, my answer from a Muslim point of view, to summarize, and do check the description for like where the references are from. But anyway, regret is the body telling you your soul is bleeding. Sounds really weird, right? But if your body is bleeding, your physical body is bleeding, you do something about it, right? Okay, so the same thing with regret. Like if you're feeling bad, that's your body telling you there's something wrong, you should gotta do something about it. But what can you do about it? Because a lot of the things you're doing are ruining your life, okay? And my answer, actually the Islamic answer, is God's guidance can turn your mistakes into powerful lessons that turn our human weakness, because everybody makes mistakes, just a human weakness, right? It will turn that into what the Quran describes as a mighty success, in that you shouldn't feel bad you made a mistake so much. More what you should do is like, right, what am I messing up on? What are the life guides that you've been given by God? Follow that, and that failure will be a lesson that will positively propel you forward. Let me go around our participants. Dust, your thoughts.
Well, that was very beautiful what you've just said, and thank you for that. I think really what I could say is not much different from yours, apart from obviously agnostic point of view. I think that regret also is very, very positive, and it's a human emotion to relive past events that have just happened or, in fact, happened long ago, and to ask ourselves, did we perform at our very best in that situation? And clearly empathy is involved and important, and for an individual to have empathy would also therefore have a lot more regrets in life. But though that means having more regrets means being able to rework events that have happened in the past that cannot be changed anymore, of course, but rework them so that in case something similar manifests again, that we can now bring what we would desire to bring into that situation, and so walk away feeling fulfilled, feeling you've met a commitment to whatever your religious background or ethical background is, and then for transform forward as a human being, knowing that you are not only you personally growing, but the situation with, because it all involves other human beings, this of course, because mostly, and knowing that you're that you've added to the community and to friends or family, and improved the scenario that you had regretted in the past or a similar scenario. Thank you.
Cool. Yeah, I love the thing about growth, but let me give Waheed the chance. What are your any thoughts, any feelings?
No, it depends what it is. I think regret is something. I think every single individual on this planet, of every faith, lives with. We all have regrets that we've, done things that we probably shouldn't have, and sometimes they can sort of eke into our minds, and we shouldn't let them. We shouldn't really let them get to. How do we combat it? You know. Yes, that's
Cool. I love everything that people say because it's kind of like what you're saying is a lot what a lot of people talk about. Like, so you said, so Dust said, I'm going to deal with something that Dust said that I think is incredibly important, and that is growth. Okay, we are constantly like, the reason why we make mistakes is because the world is a bit complicated, and it's a bit complicated partly because we're not the same people we were yesterday or when we were small babies. For example, when we were small babies, we were pooing our nappies, right? We thought that was normal, but we developed and we develop into a new world, and we keep learning. And so the whole point of it is we can either look at it in a negative way, oh, we made mistakes, oh, well, it's terrible, life is terrible, and then we don't learn from it, or we can see life, and this is the Islamic perspective. In fact, when I say Islamic, it's actual. In Islam, we believe all religions come from God anyway. So I'd say all religious perspective is that this life, and let's say the next life as well, is a continuous is continuous growth. And so we're learning, we're developing, these are growing pains, if you want to describe it that way. So that's one idea. And the thing you said about we shouldn't let it drag us down, I'm not sure if I agree with that, right? Pain, suffering, regret, these are your body giving you feedback that something is wrong, work on it. And if you don't deal with it, and this is the reason why I'm specifically talking about this, and this is really interesting that you said you shouldn't regret, right? This is something that modern day spiritual teachings, these, I think, fake spiritual teachings, I would describe them, living in the now, don't worry about the past, just live in the now, don't regret and stuff like that. That's really wrong, because if you don't deal with the small regrets, they become big regrets, and then they become overwhelming. So people go, oh, my regret is becoming overwhelming. That's because you didn't deal with the smaller problems, the smaller lessons, so you end up making more and more mistakes, and they become bigger mistakes. What do you think about that, Waheed? Just because I'm responding
you
to
can
that,
learn,
and I'll get Dust to
but
respond to what
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. The other thing is you can learn from your regret, right? Instead of letting them. of course you will feel down, but then you learn from your regrets and become a stronger person. No matter what faith, but you can become a stronger person from your regrets and learn from them and expand even more.
Cool. I mean, Dust, what are your
And
thoughts?
learning from
Okay, sorry. Go on. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
I think I'm not sure how many of us have watched Westworld here, but regrets play an important part in the development of what androids experience in Westworld, and how they live a life of pretty horrendous horror. But once they're entitled to relive their memories and relive events that have happened before, then they can actually make, hopefully, positive change. Because
How are we gonna get
yes,
viewers?
regrets
How are
are.
we gonna get you? Dust got me to watch Westworld, and because he recommended it, I watched the whole series really quickly because I take seriously Dust's recommendation. But for those who haven't watched it, so them to understand what you're talking about, androids, it's like they might just be thinking Android on their phone or something. I don't know what they'll be thinking. Help them understand what you're talking about.
Well, Westworld is a television program that uses analogies of robots, artificial intelligence, which are real things, by the way, let alone, sorry to call them analogies, but they can be used as analogies as well. And how it refers to how these people in the show have built robots to use as slaves in their pursuit of profit and glorifying of themselves as individual or park owners. And it's based so rich kids can come along and live their fantasies out on these slaves. But then the show transpires into trying to give these robots memories and what happens with those memories and what they do with them as they become sentient, and what is sentience, and what do we do with these strong emotions that we have, like we're talking about right now? How do we turn a negative, what can be perceived as a negative, and turn it into something where we can grow? And hopefully, I believe growth is making sure the community learns from my mistakes or their mistakes, and together we can collectively, consciously move forward with a solution that isn't about revenge or petty emotions, but about human development and human growth, which is considerate and understanding.
Cool. So I'm trying to summarize the pretty intense information, loads of information that you just gave us there. So there's this idea of, so the show, it from what I understood and from what you're explaining, is it's kind of like trying to tell us a story about how consciousness works, or conscience even works, through these artificial intelligence robots. And it tells a story about all sorts of suffering through regret and past memories and things like that, which is, regret is, I suppose, living through past memories, isn't it? Okay, so that's what I understand from what you're saying. And I think my next question, and I'll give you a brief idea of what I think the answer is. My next question is, we got to a place of regret by, let's say, messing up in some way. We all mess up, cool. Okay, but how do we go forward? How do we make better choices? And I think it's incredibly hard to know what better choices are. And we can see, especially in the West, where depression is going up and people making all sorts of, I would say, terrible choices, and depression is just part of that kind of statistic. It's really hard to know what is the right path forwards. And from the Quran, it says, if you really want to learn from your mistakes, there's only one way, and that is God's guide, because God is the one who designed you, who knows you best. And you, in your short life, you're not really going to figure out everything about how you work, how the world works, how it all interacts. It's a massive thing to figure out. So that's my short answer. How do we move forward? God's guide. That's through all the different religions. They basically teach the same thing. Dust, any thoughts? And then I'll go to Waheed.
Absolutely. I think firstly we have to accept that people make mistakes. I think this has to be a common acknowledgement amongst people that, yeah, we can roll up, be confident, be full of ourselves, and be knowing we're doing the right thing, and then suddenly make a terrible mistake. And that individual that does that should be allowed the space to grow as a person and understand that that was a mistake, and do it in a way that is understanding, not just condemning. Obviously, jumping to the first emotion is easily done, but I do not believe that is a cause for a better future. And also education. The more education we have, how to learn about our emotions and how that our emotions to affect other people, because not everyone's an empath, not everyone's brought up, not everyone's naturally that way. There are obviously psychopaths as well, and everything in between. So making sure that we have a constant situation where we meet other people, like we were discussing before, one of our talks long ago, where we make sure we have different cultures in the same school, that sort of education, so we don't make this silly mistakes about someone's religion or colour, because just lack of knowledge, and we don't mean to make that mistake. It just happens because we are, in our society in the West, segregated.
What's your opinion on that? The best way forwards is to listen to your designer or creator. So you're talking about education. I agree with that. But education is a little bubble of information based in a lot of our culture tells you as well, because your education from the East might be very different to what you get in the West and stuff like that. So, like, what are your thoughts about the limits of education, and where does God play into it?
Well, you're probably asking the wrong person that question, really.
I'm just saying from a logical point
I do
of
think
view.
that. I just do think that you, as you rightly identified just a moment ago, that we don't have absolute knowledge. Therefore, it is impossible not to make mistakes. And the only way I look at it is to make sure we have an education that is understanding of that basic, what I regard as a basic reality.
Cool, I agree. I think it's very important to have that humility to not think you know it all, because that's always a dangerous point, and keep searching for the truth. And I think the truth does transpire if you talk to enough people, especially if they're from enough different perspectives, and you don't get fixed on your own particular idea, and you're always ready to keep learning. If you're always a student, you always keep learning, and I think that's a good place to be, I think. Waheed, any thoughts?
Yes. Thing is, my perspective is, if you didn't make mistakes, you wouldn't learn anything. So, I mean, all professionals, doctors, police officers, all professions, they've all made mistakes, and you learn from them, and you sort of become better at your profession. I mean, even jobs, and as Dark was saying, regarding segregation, why there has been segregation, and people building communities and bringing them forward, whereas before we weren't seeing it much, and that was a mistake, and things were snowballing out of control. Now people are realizing that having all cultures and having all these perspectives together is opening things up a bit more. And I can give you another example, like cookery. Cookery. You do cookery.
I'm rubbish at it, but tell me about it anyway.
Something that people make mistakes. I mean, you probably won't kill a person from making a dish which is going to be completely, revolting. But you might make it. But you can learn from a mistake, and maybe the next time you're cooking something for that particular guest or that person, you might, you get a better perspective of that person and how he wants it, and how you can cook it better to his taste or your own taste. So, in a way, I guess making mistakes is important, whereas if we didn't, we probably wouldn't learn much. That's my perspective. Yeah.
So thank you for that. So I like the thing you said about professionals make mistakes, because if you listen to anybody at the top of their game, they make the most mistakes. So there's all these, if you're old enough to know who Michael Jordan is, so this is kind of examples that come to my mind. If I was younger, I'd probably come up with younger people's examples, but Michael Jordan, probably the best basketball player ever, or maybe there's LeBron James. I've got no idea. I hope LeBron James is a basketball player or not American football player. Do you know, Dust? Does anybody know LeBron James? Is he a basketball player? I don't want to look totally stupid on the show.
I have to Google it.
Oh, okay, well, let's Google. Anyway, so apparently these kind of people are the best basketball players. I probably should have picked something else, but I'm not a sports kind of guy, right? But the point is that they make so many mistakes, and that's why they're successful, right? So that's a really good point. And the point, kind of a point that comes from that is that most people, we're all having a nice cushy conversation right now where everybody's agreeing that, oh yeah, we should confront our mistakes and deal with our mistakes. But the reality is most people really hate making mistakes. They don't like to look stupid in front of people, because that's part of the difficulty of making mistakes. But the reason why some people are so exceptional is because they don't care what you think. They're going to make the mistakes, and they're going to make them loads of times, because what they have, this is a psychological term, it's called growth mindset. And that is where they don't really see mistakes as mistakes. They just see mistakes as a next learning thing. But most people don't have that. And when I say most people, there's an interesting statistic, right? And it goes like this. Most people they rather be miserable than to stand out. So just making a mistake makes you stand out. So it's like they rather play safe. That's the reality. So I don't want people... this show is all about keeping it real and trying to make a difference to at least one person's life. That's why I try to just keep pushing reality. The reality is most people are scared of making mistakes. Why are they scared of making mistakes? Because they're scared of other people's opinions. Okay, so you have to get to that place where you're not scared of other people's opinions. And I'll give you a quick solution. And again, it's an ancient spiritual teaching from Islam and Christianity, and I call it Judaism as well, because they come from the same book, which is to get that greater perspective. The reason why we're scared is we care about, we've basically influenced by our ego, which makes us concentrate on the short term. But if we care about the long term, the big perspective, and then we make better choices. And how do you get that big perspective? There's only one big perspective according to religion, and that is that God is watching you, and God wants you to be amazing. Okay, doesn't put you on this earth to just make money and stuff, right? And when you're doing bad things or making short-term selfish goals of just making money and being boring, basically, your soul hurts for that, right? And so what I'm trying to get at, to stop talking too long, is in the Bible it says, fear of God is the root of all wisdom. And in the Quran it says, those who fear God's judgment, and this sounds really terrible, fear, right? They will have paradise in this life and the next, because everybody fears something. You either fear human beings or God. When you fear God, you forget the piddly human beings and you make better choices, and that's how you overcome your short-term self-destructive fears. Dust, any thoughts?
Well, that was very intriguing, thank you. And I think Speaker's Corner itself is quite a good example of what you've just touched upon, which is to stand and speak at Speaker's Corner. Most people don't want to do it because they're just frightened of making mistakes, even though they're probably far more qualified than me, far greater in verbal dexterity and capability and understanding of events than me. And I listen to these people and find them all the time in just going around Speaker's Corner. But they are, even though they are so much more competent and capable, they refuse to stand up because they fear making a mistake. And I think when they look back in their lives on your dying bed or something, I think you probably will regret that, because the world needs people to stand up and speak, men, women, children, to openly to stand in a forum and say how they feel about what's happening today. Because what's happening today, pretty horrendous. And that's why I stand up. But I know I meet people all the time. It's become wonderfully talented, but just fear of, and then you get the bullies that speak to, just to make one point, but the fear of people. There are horrific bullies in our childhood, and teachers that can be horrific bullies that stamp out this passion to stand up and speak. It's done by people like pseudo atheist Steve, done by those terrible teachers and bullies at school. They are all in the mix, all designed, and all have the same objective, which is stopping diversity of thought ever transpiring in any forum or interaction at work, life, family, etc.
Beautiful. It's either getting colder or the hairs are going up, whatever the phrase was, from hearing what you were saying, because that was beautiful. And what was beautiful is what a lot of what I would say the most successful people fear the most, which is regret or dreams not lived, right? And I say dreams, I don't believe in selfish dreams about me. Your soul wants you to do something great, whether you believe in it in a sort of, I don't know, your own version of spirituality or whatever. Psychologists tell you, and when I say psychologist, look this up. Viktor Frankl, always talk about this guy, right? And they always talk about meaning. What is meaning? This meaning is a sort of a wishy-washy word for spirituality, really. It's like finding something great and meaningful and powerful to do with your life. And you want to do that. And psychologists have known this for a long time. So whether you believe in religion or not, everybody accepts in the psychological world that there is something great you must achieve, or you must try to achieve great goodness, not selfish goodness, right? So yeah, fear of regret can overcome the fear of others. That was beautiful. And then there was another point, but I didn't make it. But anyway, cool. I was kind of making notes of what you were talking about. What was the last thing you said, Dust? Maybe you'll remind me.
I can't remember now. I'll have to look at it on YouTube.
Yeah, we'll check it up afterwards. So, Waheed, any last thoughts? Because we're kind of wrapping up the kind of our half an hour on this before we move on to the next two questions.
No, not much. I think he nailed it pretty well there, regret is something, again, we all have to live by and abide by and just learn from it, That's what I can really say.
Well, actually, it's come back to me. So fear is real. So Dust is talking about bullies. There's bullies everywhere. There's always somebody, either they've got bad intentions in their lives, and there's always, let's say, the dark side versus the good side, let's just say, right? So there's always the dark side wanting to put out the light of the light side, as it were. It's a constant battle of life, just the nature of things, okay? And so I don't want to underplay the fact that there is fear, okay? But as I say, if you have the greater fear of not living a life that's true and meaningful, on your deathbed, you will feel bad about it. In fact, you will feel bad about it all the way through. That's what I think is actually the heart of depression, where you're getting a feedback mechanism before you die saying, listen, you are not living the life you could be living. We know it's scary. That's why most people don't live life true to themselves. But it's better to live this kind of, let's say, almost dangerous life of putting yourself out there, exposing yourself in some ways to these bullies who want the world to be a darker place. And but overall, you will feel yourself much happier, and that's my experience. Like I would, me, Dust, and Sound Like Dust, and loads of other people who put themselves out there. Although it's pretty scary, I think life is way more exciting when you do it. Those are just my thoughts about that. Let's move on to next question. So Dust is the co-presenter, and here are his two questions. Do you want to introduce your own question, Dust?
Which one are we going with first?
Oh, sorry. Let's go with why is history censored first? Shall we?
Yes. Yeah, that's brilliant. So, why is history censored in our schools? And does this have lead to dangerous effects in the future? Which is, of course, which we all have to grow up into. So, I was basically, my education in the West is very, very limited in its breadth of understanding of how we got to where we are today. Very limited. We do touch upon some political events, but mainly it is just a very bleached appearance of history, which is terrifying, which can only lead, by the way, to repeating the horrors of the past. I feel that Hitler was a horror of the past, by the way, and I feel like we're going back into that. So in my school, we got virtually no education of how wonderful the unions have contributed to the quality of life that we live in day-to-day basis, from a health service, from having a wage, from being able to have maternity leave, from being able to have a wage, which is more than just a surviving wage, but a wage of opportunity to exist. As you've been talking about in our last question just a moment ago, because to have regrets, you have to make mistakes, and you shouldn't be punished with starvation or some instant death because of a mistake made. But wealth is required for people to make mistakes and learn. So how is it that unions have so little in our consciousness of all the brilliance that they've done? Just to clarify, though, at this point, I don't think unions should exist. The only reason unions actually exist is because the working class have no representation whatsoever in the political sphere. Therefore, we have unions. That's the only reason why unions exist. So, anything you'd like to contribute to maybe what you regard as censorship in our education? I've just named what I feel is a terrible crime which has happened, and therefore, without understanding how we've got the wealth we have today, the shared wealth, that is, by the way, education, we are doomed to repeat the austerity, which is where Hitler rose and transpired, and he took over in that horror. So education is leading us to Hitler.
Yeah.
But how do you feel about the situation at the moment with education and the censorship, or in any sphere of education and censorship?
Yeah. So me, or he?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, you.
Okay, so I want to explain. So Dust is. I'm going to respond to something Dust has said that is really important, but is very rarely understood because very much partly because history is not really taught properly in schools, right? The core lessons of history are not taught. They just told the facts and a few surface lessons, right? People don't understand this really difficult thing to swallow, right? Which is that, and I wish I could put it better, but basically we are very close to repeating what happened at Hitler's time. we don't realize why. Okay, people think that at the time of Hitler, the Germans were just all terrible people. No, actually what happened was they were normal people who just kept quiet when bad things were happening. They just went along with things. And it's actually really hard, okay, to go away from the norm. As I talked about, people are scared of standing out. Okay, so these people, the Germans, did horrific things, absolutely horrific things. Okay, and they were ordinary people, and there's great books about this. Like there's a great book that I haven't read, but I've kind of read bits of quotes from it, called Ordinary Men. I do learn a lot from Jordan Peterson. Do check out his videos. He explains this in more detail as a clinical psychologist on YouTube. But the idea is that terrible things happen when people, when good men stay quiet, let's just say. And there's just to try to explain that a little bit better, there's a famous Milgram experiment that demonstrates, even today, that most of us will do exactly what the Nazis did. Okay, and there is one way out of not being a Nazi. Let's say you are basically, if you want to claim you're not a Nazi, probably not true. Sounds really terrible, right? So Waheed, you're probably a Nazi. Sounds really nasty, right? Okay, unless you can tell me this really weird thing, right? Okay, in short, is unless you can tell me you love standing out like a sore thumb, and you don't care what anybody thinks. Everybody likes to say that about themselves, but do you practically demonstrate that in your life all the time? Okay, and Waheed's a very old friend of mine, so me calling him a Nazi, he doesn't take it personally, right? Okay, I don't think you do. Waheed, do you mind being called a Nazi on YouTube? Okay. No, you're right with it. But let me explain. The Milgram experiment is really important, okay? And I'm trying to get through it really quickly. Basically, they do this experiment where, and they did it loads of times, and it's proved to be solid, okay, in terms of psychology, like repeatable. And it goes like this: they have two people, one's an actor, one's not an actor. The actor goes on the other side of the wall, but you can hear the person on the other side of the wall. The person who's being experimented on, he basically is faced with a bunch of switches, and those switches are basically electric shock, light to deadly, okay? And there's a person with a lab coat on, that's part of the experiment, and the person in the lab coat says, every time the person on the other side who you can only hear gets the answer wrong, just flick the switch and go higher and higher until the electric shocks become deadly. And pretty much everyone goes through it, and the only way you don't go through it, they've demonstrated, is you have high, very strong moral values, right? Like you are willing to stand out as part of your personal development. If you're a normal person, you will kill people with just because somebody's wearing a lab coat next to you, a sign of authority. So that's that. I know I talked a long time. I'm going to briefly talk about my general perspective on this, which is, again from the Quran, short version is, bad things happen to bad people, right? So if you're a culture of corruption and bad people, selfish people, which, although many people are nice in Western society, we are very, very selfish, okay, and I can easily demonstrate that, right? Okay, so what happened, and we're only really, most of us are only concerned with living out our own lives and being happy or successful in our own lives. We don't really care about the rest of the world, which shows itself in education, right? So if we're selfish, we get selfish out. You selfish in, selfish out. So our education just basically makes us ready for capitalism. It doesn't teach us moral values because we don't care enough about moral values. That's my short answer. It sounds really horrific and harsh, but that's my short version. I can demonstrate that more. Anyway, Dust, you're leading this helpful show.
Would you like to come in at this point and say something?
Not that I'm aware of. No, you carry on, Dust. You carry on.
So I'd just like to say that was a very good observation you brought out there as well. It's not just history that is censored from our schools, but it's morality as well. And history is a fundamental facet of morality, because as literally we just spoke a moment ago on the first question, without regrets, without this sense of history, without being able to reflect, then, oh boy, what we ended up with is this is a pretty, I mean, as you rightly said, most Nazis didn't know they were Nazis. What they were, though, I think it's very important to, which is not in our schools, point out, is that most of them were Protestants and Catholics who had been fed a diet of, who have literally had the education that we've just described as terrible, very capitalist, very moral, removed from that. It sounds like an oxymoron, what I've just said, but it's instead of having that diversity of morality, which is different communities and everything, but it's that gunfire.
Yeah, that's why I shouldn't be smiling, but that's why I'm smiling. But anyway, it sounds more like gunfire than fireworks. But anyway, carry on.
Sounds like they don't like our video.
I'm glad you asked, because I probably would look like I was smiling at the wrong thing, like Dust was saying some serious stuff. Anyway, sorry, carry on.
I'll send a link of how gunfire accounts to so many deaths across the world that have been shot into the air. Yeah. But just to clarify, just bring the point back is, I mean, even so, and that most education that people had leading up to the World War at schools and that would become the adults to be soldiers had this terrible morality forced onto them. And I'm not saying Catholic is terrible morality. I'm just saying that the lack of any diversity whatsoever, because the horrors what Hitler created was exactly the same as the first just past almost 1,000 years of history in Europe. There's exactly the same repeating of it. And how do we repeat that first? I mean, look how Muslims were treated in Europe in the First Reich. They were treated just as the Jewish community were, which is you had to wear stars and you were allowed to function and walk around, but you were certainly pointed out as the enemy. And in those Catholic and Protestant schools, they were forcing this idea constantly that it was, this is normality. And where did that lead? It led to just more war, genocide, crusades, etc. So it's vital to have this sense of history that, in fact, we have great relationships with the Western and Eastern world and other parts of communities. And majority of the time, when we are allowed to live together in different communities of diversity, it is generally a beautiful experience, a shared experience, and cultures change. I mean, the English food, just to look at the English food, for God's sake, if you any confusion whether how great diversity is, we'd all be eating just Yorkshire pudding and beef every day if it wasn't, and fish fingers and chips. That would be our diet for the rest of our lives if it wasn't for all these wonderful cultures coming in. And this translates all across the world, of course. But we must have this sense of this school, in our schools, this idea that this diversity of history and morality is vital to experience that and understand and learn about how and where we got to today through unions, through Christians, and even though, and Muslims and their science that they've added. All this must be taught, and it should taught all through our lives. It isn't just up to 16, then you're done and dusted.
To say, yeah. I've got something to say, yeah. History, I mean, a very good point as well. A very, very good point what you said, but my perspective on history can also, sort of teach not only good, but in some cases, it may have caused populism to rise. Would you agree? History has not only caused some good, but even some bad amongst some people, not just in Europe, but all around the world, like tribalism, populism, the growing amount of racism, and how do we combat that? I mean, history is taught, but is it taught in the right way in some schools or in some places? And are people taking it the right way? I mean, how do we combat, the bad apples who are teaching it wrong?
Do you mind if I ask you, or this is to both of you, of course, But have you? Sounds like a silly question, by the way. I'm sure it is. But have you experienced racism for your skin or religious racism in England?
Of course, yeah, I did some, yeah, a little, yes, a little bit, yeah, just. But it's not just about my experiences, but it's about various experiences. It's not just the racism, but it's also when World War II was happening, and when there was this war, and basically the whole of Europe, some people were taught to hate Germans. I mean, I had a friend who, because he had a German surname, and he was hated because of his surname. Was that? I mean, that was sort of. I don't know whether you call it racism, because they were both the same color, but because he nationalism, you'd call it. When you have, when you have same group of people hating on the same color, like sectarian nationalism. That's it. He was hated because he had a German name. He was constantly discriminated by his teachers.
Sorry, I just want to say,
how do you
thank you for sharing. Oh, this is the question. What solutions can we bring to bear to communicate to each other how to hopefully combat from your own experiences? Obviously, I think that education is a vital facet and a proper sense of real history, not just a nationalistic sort of agenda which we normally get, a flag waving. I'm not saying that's bad, but if that's all we're getting, then clearly we're going to end up with horrors of World War II.
I mean, in this country, but even in you go to India and Pakistan, you get Muslims being discriminated by the Indians, and you get some Sikhs living in Pakistan, and you get Pakistanis discriminated against the Hindus. I mean,
what are their schools like?
I don't know, but you hear it. But if you Google it, if you on the internet, and if you read about the history of Muslims and Hindus, it's the sectarian hate is far worse and has been for decades upon decades. Why? Because the history hasn't been taught properly there.
Yes.
How?
In the history.
It's worse.
So,
yeah, I mean, that's your title, isn't it, Dust? You're saying, why is history censored? Because that's kind of, as Waheed is putting, basically explaining, that's not real history we're talking about. It's kind of the censored version of history for an agenda to hate each other, to divide ourselves.
Tribalism and politics are dividing every one of us.
So would we conclude, therefore, that our current education system contributes to war, division, and racism and other horrors of reality?
Oh, yeah, killings. It's just getting on worse. And I mean, where is this going to end? I mean, where do we find a solution? How do we find a solution to all this?
Do you think it would be possible for these Muslims and Pakistan communities to have the same school together? Start off with that basic building block.
Yes. I think the Muslims should know about what the Sikhs and the Hindus and the Sikhs should learn to know what the Muslims practice and be tolerant to one another. Like, I would say there's more tolerance in the Western world than there is probably in the Far East, especially in the subcontinent world. And it's not just that, it's you get other Muslim tribes hating other Muslim tribes, but unfortunately some are not prepared to listen. Muslims are being murdered because, I mean, our community is being, we're a small sect in Pakistan, and we are murdered because of what we believe.
Yes, so just to kind of background, me and Waheed, my old friend Waheed, we're part of a very small community which are very peaceful, but we're murdered because we're different, basically. And so it's been a very long history of persecution. So that's what I think you're explaining, isn't it, Waheed?
Absolutely true, yes. So
So I think education is clearly something we've all agreed upon that needs to be transformed and so that it can be transformative. And instead of, because when we're children, we don't look at each other for our skin color and decide to play with that boy or girl with that skin color or religion. As a child, you just go up and play with somebody who's the same age as you and have fun, interact, and do what children have always done throughout all of human life.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. I think it's to do with the parents and the upbringing of how the parents. No child is born a racist. Every child is born impure, but the society which is turning even children as young as 5 or 6 into nationalists and Nazis, racists, whatever you can call them, or even people who are religious hardliners, and because it's not taught properly. They're not taught properly. That's why.
So, Dust, I've been terrible at not telling you about the time. So we've gone a few minutes over our set time for this particular question. Do you want to round it up or something?
I'd like you to round it because you haven't spoken as much yet. So cool. I'd like to.
So I love this thing that Waheed said about no child is born a racist, which is so true, right? We're told by our parents and things like that. We're educated into being racist or nationalists or whatever it is. And children, if you watch children, they are the most communal or social beings you would see. Like, if anybody knows London, nobody makes eye contact in London on the tube and stuff like that. But you set a child free, the children just talk to each other. They don't care about the silly social rules that we've made up to divide ourselves into, different groups. But how do the parents teach the right thing? I always bring it back to morality. I don't think we're magically going to improve things unless we start fixing ourselves. Education is... A moral education comes from being moral people. That's my thing. And so I just come back to good people. So the verse of the Quran says, bad things are for bad people, good things are for good people. This is a very general statement of kind of cause and effect of start from yourself, be good, and good things happen. That's my thoughts on that.
All right then. So go into the next question, which is there an energy crisis? Now, it sounds like a ridiculous question to be uttering in the middle of an energy crisis. But, of course, coming from the dust, it's going to be a little bit more profound than simple observing reality and consuming the reality that we've been fed. So I would actually argue, is there a ownership crisis of energy? Maybe that is the question that should be in our newspapers. And it is very odd that the question that has been told, the narrative that has been told to the communities across Europe and the West and the East is that it's an energy crisis. But the only reason why we're in a crisis, of course, is because someone purposely put us into this situation to begin with, because they knew that a society, a culture, a community dependent on oil, which is not owned by us, means we are dependent on the people that do own the oil, fully dependent, and therefore they can create the crisis on whim, literally on a whim, thus rendering those cultures, societies and countries a slave to that resource. So do we have an energy crisis, or do we have in fact an ownership crisis? Because I think if we owned the energy, we wouldn't be probably choosing an energy which is a scarce resource. We'd probably choose the energy to choose which is everywhere, constant, never ending. And that isn't fusion or nuclear. Those are insane. But in actual fact, wind, reservoirs, solar, wave, etc., to anything of that magnitude of resources, but we didn't. And now we are dependent on the very small group of people who own the energy resource, which is oil. Now, do you think that there is an energy crisis yourself, or do you think it's more complicated than that? Khalid, so what do you think?
Yeah, I do agree, and again, I like to say that my thoughts are coming from an Islamic point of view because I don't think my concoctions of thoughts and ideas can be very limited. And so, what's my Islamic point of view? And again, do check the description, or I always put kind of reference and things. Is that if you look at how the world operates, our needs are constantly being taken care of. We underestimate that because it's done so nicely, but if the temperature was a little bit higher, or the clouds didn't quite move as smoothly to one place or another, recycling our water, we'd just be dead just like that. We're very fragile beings. To give you a sense of how fragile we are, if you know what a bubble, like when you blow bubbles, and there's a very thin kind of bubble itself, is really thin kind of liquid, right? That's how thin basically our atmosphere is compared to the planet. It's very, very delicate. We live in a very carefully balanced environment, for people who don't appreciate how amazing our environment is. And so you might say, what's that got to do with anything? Well, that gives you an idea that God is taking care of us, because I think that's a very logical outcome of that realization. If we look at how nature works and how it takes care of our needs. And then part of that realization should be, as the Quran points out, that we've given you all sorts of things to take care of you. It says we've created horses and mules and whatever, but we've also will create things that you do not know of to take care of you, right? So basically technology. So my point is that nature has the resources to take care of us. If there's an energy crisis, it's going to be man-made, and it will happen every now and then because human beings are selfish and they want to grab resources and cause feuds and bloodshed and all that kind of stuff. Every now and then that will happen, and the only way out, again, as I always talk about it, is morality. Those are sort of my thoughts on it. Does that make any sense, or is that kind of too long-winded? Do you follow that?
I'll come back to some of the points you brought up in a moment. I'd just like to hear out of a speaker and see what he'd like to add to the forum, please.
Yes, I think we might be at a crisis. I think we are creating our own crisis. Through all the things that are happening in the world today. It's not created by religion, but it's created by man himself. That's all I can say, really. Yeah.
So I'd just like to comment on that, because I places like, Shell and Exxon and Saudi Arabia, these are all very religious institutions. I know it sounds Shell is a business, but fundamentally it's a Christian-owned enterprise. There was a news article just yesterday saying that the Church of England had billions of pounds invested into Shell, a church that claims to be looking after the poor, claims to be about charity, claims to be about the betterment of the community, is literally investing in a company destroying this planet, and, as I just laid out a moment ago, creating an energy crisis that never needs to exist. Because if we'd invested, I think I was saying on one of our other chats that since the 1970s, just the 70s, these oil companies have made in pure profit 52 trillion pounds in pure profit just from the 70s, where's that money gone? Certainly hasn't gone to developing renewables, because that would mean wouldn't need all this oil. And again, sorry.
Yeah, they've taken it, or either they've spent it, have taken it and spent it on themselves. Probably. We don't know where it's gone. Probably they've just grabbed it with both hands, and which they're not supposed to do, but they have. I'm sure that's what's my perspective, is that, you know, they've stolen it, or just collaborated with it, just taken it. That's my opinion.
But yes, these are men and women that have done this, but there is a religious connection to it as well. Would you agree with that?
Well, yes, and they're not supposed to. The religion doesn't teach them to do these things, yet they are being manipulated, and yet they're doing it against what the religion teaches them to do.
Yes, as I pointed out last week, it's not the religion, it's not Christians as a whole, by the way, I'm referring to, or Muslims or Jewish. It's merely the leadership I'm always referring to. The leadership claims this great purity and then invests and makes money, billions of pounds, from oil companies. Are we allowed to talk about Saudi Arabia, by the way?
Yeah.
Is that a bit of...
We're good, I think. Yeah.
All right, okay.
So I'm going to make... should I make a point about Saudi Arabia? Because it has came up, I think, in the last show or something. And there's a general misunderstanding or conflation between Saudi Arabia. Saudi, by the way, just means the Saud family, who are currently... or they've been put in power by whoever. Let's say the British or the Americans. I can't remember exactly.
The Christians.
Okay, fine. Yep.
Ironically.
Yeah. So they are running Arabia, where most of the oil comes from in the world at the moment, if I understand that correctly. But I don't think many Muslims consider them particularly religious. They're not really representing Islam. So that's kind of very important to clarify. I made that in a comment in the previous video in the literal comment section, where the Saud family, the Saudi Arabians, they drink, they gamble. These are fundamental things that are massively prohibited in Islam, not allowed, yet they're well known for doing them. So nobody really takes them seriously as religious leaders of any sort. They're just political leaders playing economic games with the world, nothing to do with Islam. Just to clarify, that's worthy of pointing out. Another thing that's worthy of pointing out is, what is the Islamic teaching regarding this kind of oil wealth? And that is that this kind of land-based resource is the property of the people, not just so let's say the government are custodians of it, and their duty is to spread the wealth, not on themselves, or not on all sorts of arms deals to bomb Sudan and stuff like that, right? That's not the point of that wealth. So that's kind of Islamic point of view. And also, just to give a Christian biblical point of view, Jesus said that if you want to go to heaven, then he said, like, a fat man can't go to heaven unless, I can't remember the exact quote, but it's kind of a really famous one. Basically, unless he goes through the eye of a needle. The idea is that basically the only way you get to heaven is to basically give away your wealth. So don't spend it on yourself. So all this greed and selfishness, land grabbing, selfishly spending all the wealth of the world on a few people grabbing the wealth of the world and spending it on themselves, as opposed to, if you're a true Christian, spending it on other people. If you're a true Muslim, realizing you're custodian of that wealth and you're supposed to give it to the people, which is basically the same teaching as Christianity in that sense. So none of these groups are being religious, even if they've got the religious label, is my short answer.
Well, I'm just going to say that was a very beautiful statement about governments being the custodians of these energy resources. I think it's a sentiment I completely concur with, and I think it's a very beautiful, enriching, and life-affirming thought to have, and I think that is absolutely true. So I'm going to make my conclusion. So you then can make yours, Waheed, or whoever wants to go next after me. But maybe I was wrong when I said there was a management ownership crisis. Maybe there's a religious crisis here, and it's the crisis of who owns our religions and how they are operating across freely and without restraint across the world. That's not condemning the religious people, of course, by the way, as I hope you appreciate. What do you think, Waheed?
Yeah, I think because what's happened is the religious people who are supposed to follow the religion have become they've gone more into worldly objects, if you know what I mean. Worldly objects like, the money and, the alcohol and the gambling, and it's just become when they're supposed to be practicing their religions in a informative way, in a proper way, they have let the worldly designs corrupt their minds, to corrupt their minds. I don't know if you agree with that or not.
Completely. I think. What do you think of the statement that was just made a moment ago, that government should be the custodians of our energy and wealth? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think they should. I think it's a very strong statement. I completely agree. Very, very strong and a powerful statement.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there should be the guide, and that's how it should be done. I mean, it's a very, very good and powerful and informative statement to be made. Definitely, yeah.
I completely agree. I think it's very wonderful. Thank you for that statement. I did not expect our conversation to conclude with such profound interactions, but I'm so glad. How much time have we got, by the way, before I...
As usual, we've gone a few minutes over time, so that means we've enjoyed ourselves too much. We're 7 minutes past 8. We're supposed to finish at 1 minute past, but that's cool.
Oh, it's just...
Good show, yeah.
If we're this exciting, how can we stop? And it has been very exciting and informative and educational, and the best of Speaker's Corner.
Yes, I think it's been a good show, as it always is. Obviously, my ringleader, Khalid, he's the starter of all this. Without him, this show wouldn't be able to go on. So good with Khalid Safir.
Yay!
So, absolutely,
that
is.
He's the man.
Here, yeah.
He's the main man.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any more questions? Well, I don't know.
Well, would you all like to say the last comment about a positive reaction to everything we said, just to give some positivity to the world? Maybe not even on the subjects we've talked about, just a positive statement.
We can't change the world. It's not too late. Like I said, education is key. It's how you take the education, whether you take it in a good way or you take it in a bad way, in a national or populism way. If you take it in a good way, by not creating tribalism, then there is huge hope for the future. But if the world carries on the way it is, then the signs do look bleak. I think it's not just religions that need to come together, but people of knowledge also need to come together and get an idea of who we are and what the world stands for. This way, peace can be obtained.
I couldn't say much more beautifully myself. Yeah. I think parents, adults, children, we require a diverse and collective education, and with that, therefore, we can have an agency, and with that agency, we would create a world of humanity.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, wonderfully said. Wonderfully said. That is just the way I like it. That is just the perfect answer. That's just the way it should be, and hopefully it turns out that way in the future.
We have to all of us have a responsibility, as we said in the first question that we had tonight. We have to stand up, and yes, we're going to get abuse and tore down, but that's how the Nazis got into power, because people didn't stand up.
Yes, I know.
Right, I'll leave the last thought to you, and you can lead us out as well.
Cool. Okay. So I'm just going to repeat some of the key words that everybody's saying. So first of all, thank you so much, Waheed, for participating. And the key word that I love that you mentioned there was a positivity, which I always try to come up with a positivity. There's still hope, but I love the balance, which is if we carry on the way we're going, we should not be blind to how dangerous our path is. Especially with more dangerous weapons, we shouldn't expect anything less than World War II. Sounds bleak, but we have to be realist. But what the thing that Dust said was about responsibility. Like, we cannot take back seats. We gotta go step out there, get uncomfortable, and be responsible rather than think somebody else is gonna save the world for us and we just watch it. And my last thing really is, please like the video, subscribe. If that's the minimum of your responsibility, is to do that. Not because we're making any money out of this. It's like, you know what? If you're not being an active part of the show, but you believe, you understand what we're saying, and you understand that this is not being said on much of YouTube, because much of YouTube is about blaming other people, then the minimum you could do is like, subscribe the video so that YouTube promotes the videos to more people will view it, share it with friends directly by talking, etc., etc. But thank you very much for all the regular viewers who do watch this. Thank you very much. Dust, thank you very much. Waheed, appreciate all of you guys. Really fantastic comments and everything. Shall we shut down there, Dust?
Yeah, let's shut down. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Nice meeting you, Dust. And nice seeing you, Khalid.
Just hang on.
The dust is settled.
Go on. You say the last word, Dust.
The dust has settled. Oh, actually, I will say the last word. A proper thing. I wrote this the other day.
Okay, go on.
Your dreams are real. Now dream for the best.
Oh,
that's awesome.
2-line poem. Okay, cool. I get it. Okay. Awesome.
That's a good quote. Yeah, I like the sound of that. Yeah.
All right, I think we're dragging on now, although that was a beautiful bit of poetry at the end. I'll end it there. Thank you. Catch us next week. Bye.
All right. See you. All the best, guys.